We've talked about it a bit here. Endless reporting on Russiagate hasn't gone over that well with voters. And in his new piece in Rolling Stone, our next guest says the voters have spoken about Russiagate as evidenced by President Trump's high approval ratings and Senator Bernie Sanders being at the top of the Democratic ticket.
There you go. The fact of the matter is Russiagate does not matter. Joining us now to talk about the story that is contributing editor for Rolling Stone, friend of the show, Matt Taibbi. Great to see you, Matt. How are you?
How you doing, Crystal? Sagar, how are you?
Oh, we're doing great, Matt. Especially better now that you're here.
That's right.
Break this down for us. Your commentary on this has always just been so scathing and so on point. I mean, the Russiagate tactic of the intelligence community to go after Trump and Sanders in the exact same week really was remarkable.
Yeah, I think the remarkable thing about this story is the degree to which they appear to genuinely think it's going to work. This story very unsubtly was, it came out in the Washington Post the day before the caucus. It was so obvious that even Sanders, who's been kind of shaky on this issue, he had to point it out. But they thought, clearly somebody thought this was going to have an impact on the caucus, and it was a blowout of historic proportions. This coupled with the rising approval ratings of Trump, who's gotten like a 6-point bump since the latest iteration of Russiagate came out. I don't know how much more evidence they need that people just don't really care about this issue.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable. What did you think of? There was a moment in the debate where Bloomberg tried to, play the Russiagate card and say, oh, Putin wants Bernie Sanders. That's why we need a different candidate. And Bernie's like, oh, Mr. Bloomberg.
Mr. Bloomberg.
But what did you think of that dynamic? Because that crowd was not particularly Bernie Sanders friendly, let's say. But even in that issue, they seemed to kind of side with Bernie.
Yeah, you can't really tell a whole lot from debate crowds because it's a very, very bizarre sample. As you've discussed, Crystal, it's highly overrepresented by people who can pay an enormous fee. But even in that particular environment, that issue just doesn't go over well. And you can tell a little bit by what things get applause and which ones don't. And again, this issue is a complete zero. Polls have shown that it's so far down the list of things that people care about when they make their voting decisions. And I just don't understand the mindset that thinks that this is a winning play.
Right. And Matt, what you've chronicled is that really this is the great media failure of the decade. That, since the Iraq War, there is no other story which has consistently been overhyped and underdelivered. And the damage that this has done to the media, the trust in the media of this country, it can't even be overstated, especially in the Trump era going into the 2020 election.
Yeah, the WMD story had such an amazing impact on the way people looked at reporters. And I watched this over the years, having covered presidential elections. People started to bring up the incompetence of the media in, 2004, 2008. By 2016, people were completely tuned out to the press. They would constantly bring up our failures whenever I tried to interview people, especially on the Republican side. But now, with this Russiagate story, which is, I think, many degrees of magnitude more stupid than the WMD issue, it's turned off everybody. And it's not a partisan issue. It's, across the board. Democratic voters, Republican voters, they're just not responding to it. And the press doesn't seem to get it. I don't understand.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a little bit about Bernie's response on this, because he's been doing this thing that kind of bothers me, where when people try to weaponize the Bernie Bros narrative against him, he's been raising the possibility, look, we don't know who these people are. They could even be Russian trolls. On the one hand, I don't like it because it plays into this narrative. I do kind of like it as a troll of weaponizing their own stupid stuff against their own stupid narrative. But I don't think he's doing it as a troll. I think he's sincere in it, and it kind of bothers me.
Yeah, and I started to talk a little bit about this week. I think this is a big mistake on Bernie's part. I'm obviously a fan of Bernie generally. I really admire him for a lot of different reasons and have for over a decade now. But I think on this issue, similar to Jeremy Corbyn, he is making a mistake by kowtowing to the larger narrative of Russiagate. And he's trying to tiptoe a fine line between being dismissive of it when it pertains to him, but embracing it in all other areas. And Bernie's big strength as a politician is that he cuts through the establishment bull, right? And if he's towing in a line on this, it's going to be a major negative for him in a theoretical general election contest against Trump, who has never done. Well, he has done it, but in a way that's so transparent that Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's the interesting thing, Matt. I saw Bernie. He tweeted about the Trump campaign is suing the New York Times over a Russiagate opinion column, and he was like, "Oh, enemy of the people, freedom of the," and it just struck me as like it just didn't seem like something that is core to his message, and very much kind of pandering, like exactly as you say, to the larger narrative, maybe in exchange to try and get some centrists on his side. But it's a devil's deal that you make, because if you legitimize this narrative when they come for you, because the intelligence community rightfully sees Bernie as a major existential threat to their power and the way that they conduct business abroad, that they can certainly use it against you regardless, and you kind of are in a place where you're disavowing it whenever it applies to you, but not necessarily to everybody else.
I think the calculation that Bernie made, and I'm just guessing, I haven't spoken to anybody in the campaign about this, but I think they thought that this was a fight that was going to be too big to pick heading into a presidential election year, that it would just be too difficult to try to get past the Rubicon of all the different Russiagate delusions that are out there and run for president. Well, it's not actually something that he really cares about terribly much. I mean, has repeatedly emphasized that we should be talking about more important things. Like, that's sort of his go-to move on Russiagate. But as you say, this will bounce back on him eventually. Yeah. And I think a lot of us saw early on that it was going to be used against Bernie and his followers, from the beginning. But his record of statements on this is eventually going to be, I think, a thing that is thrown back at him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other problem, this is kind of on my mind, because we just did an interview with the Knight Foundation. They've done a big study about non-voters and why they don't vote, and large proportion of them, believe that the system is rigged. Like 38% believe that the system is rigged. It's one of the only sort of commonalities you can find among them. And look, in a lot of ways, like with freaking superdelegates and an Iowa caucus shadow app and whatever, their concerns are valid. But when you play into this narrative that, our votes don't count because Russia is pulling the strings through their like buff Bernie memes on Facebook or whatever, it just further discourages voters from participating in the process, which is something that is deeply problematic for candidates like Bernie Sanders and other anti-establishment candidates whose campaigns rest on being able to get people to buy into the system, who have been on the sidelines, who have been cynical, and having some trust and faith that their vote is actually going to count.
Yes, and Bernie's big message always, dating back decades, has been about voter empowerment, about people taking influence back for themselves from special interest, from government power. And when you turn around and say, oh, we should tremble before the awesome might of the Russian meme-making factories or whatever it is, it runs counter to Bernie's basic message that actually, yes, you can have control over your own destiny just by making an informed voting decision. You are the one who is powerful in this situation. That's not them. That's the opposite of the Russiagate message.
Right.
The Russiagate message is everybody should cower and you should trust us.
Mm-hmm. Matt, I also wanted to have, since you're such an excellent person on this, is that right now there's a fight kind of going on between actually Republicans on FISA. And I wanted to see if you had any thoughts or if you tracked that, Attorney General Bill Barr asking for a total renewal of FISA, and actually Republicans, having learned the lesson of what happened to the Trump campaign, actually saying, no, not this time. What do you think about this whole thing?
I think that's an interesting issue. I have talked to some people in the House and some Republicans who had a genuine change of heart about FISA over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. Now, obviously, since the inception of the war on terror, the Republicans have, by and large, supported most of the very draconian surveillance and security measures. FISA is obviously an old law, but it was enhanced during the war on terror period, and most Republicans supported that. But I think there's been a genuine kind of civil liberties backlash among a small portion of the Republican Party, which I think is interesting. Obviously, that's not the case with Barr, which is kind of disappointing. But I think there is a segment of the Republican caucus that would like to see some change on this issue, and you don't have to look very far to find those folks.
Yeah.
And do you think there's enough of them combined with Democrats who are also concerned about civil liberties to reform the process?
Well, the problem is that it's we've seen the complete seesaw on this, right? Because the Democrats would have been the civil libertarians in the old days, but now they've gone, the mainstream of the Democratic Party has gone the other way. Right. They've become aggressive security advocates, and they don't really particularly care about civil liberties as much. And FISA, they would see a vote to water down FISA as a vote, for Trump now. So, obviously there are going to be some people among the Democratic caucus who might be natural allies, but they're not the mainstream of the party, not from what I can tell.
Certainly interesting.
So bizarre. Matt, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Crystal. Sagar, take care.
Thanks, man. Yeah.
Coming up, an explosive piece in The Nation highlights how leaked Bloomberg campaign non-disclosure agreements may have protected bosses who were bad actors.
Our conversation with Nation's D.C. correspondent Ken Klippenstein when Rising continues.